Today, I would like to refer to one specific part of speech, and those are the articles, words which in English give a bit more detailed information about nouns in the sense of nouns being specific or non-specific. Welcome to the Lingomaniac lessons, a corner for language learning and usage means, tips and tricks. The Lingomaniac lessons, for nerds, by nerds. So, when we are talking about articles, we have two main articles which are in use. One of them is indefinite article a, or an additional form of it being an, and the definite article the. So when we're talking about indefinite article, it gives us in general information about non-specific, about non-determined nouns. Indefinite article can only be used with countable nouns. That is the first very important thing to remember. Now, I will not be going into all the possible and impossible bits and pieces which exist on articles in this video. I will just give you the most general places where people trip over when it's about the usage of both indefinite and definite article. For more detailed information and lists and very specific, use by use usages, I'll be going through in the video, the additional video, which will be available on Patreon. But for now, I will just give a brief overview. When we're talking about the indefinite article, as I mentioned, it is used with the nouns which are indefinite, indefined, indetermined, and that is the primary usage of that article. When we are talking about things we are meeting for the first time, when we are actually talking about them for the first time, when they are not yet specific. For example, there is a boy in the garden. So we're introducing that boy for the first time into our talk. We still have no information who that boy is. Second thing, which would be a very, trademark thing for the indefinite article, is to talk about singular countable nouns. As I mentioned, it is used only with countable nouns, so we oftentimes use it to show singular state, that something only exists in one. For example, I had an apple for breakfast. Doesn't mean that I had more, only one. If we go back to the talk on the nouns, there are also nouns which I mentioned when we were talking about irregular plurals. Some of the nouns have the same form for both singular and plural, and that's where we will be able to distinguish whether we're talking about singular or plural, because indefinite article is one of the means to actually show singularity or number one. Next thing that is a very common situation where you use the indefinite article is when we are talking about things which are a part of something, or when we are talking about a membership in a certain group. For example, a part of something, I had a piece of cake, meaning I didn't eat the entire cake, I ate just a piece of it. Second of all, I ate one piece of it. For membership in a certain group, that could be basically anything which represents a certain group and you are extracting a part of it. For example, Tom is an Irishman. So that means that he belongs to a group, a group which represents a certain nationality. According to that logic, professions are also those circles from which we extract a different profession. So professions will also always be marked with the indefinite article a or an. For example, I am a teacher and a translator. And for each profession, you need to point out the article, the indefinite article a or an. An would be, for example, Mary is an architect. Which brings us to the situation how to properly use a or an. The most common explanation, which circles, is that you use a if the following word, either it's a noun or some word which describes the noun, starts with the consonant, and you will be using an if the following word or the noun itself starts with the vowel. But there is one key information missing there, and that is, yes, it's correct, but not necessarily in writing, in pronunciation. So the pronunciation is the key. The purpose of any language when it's about the pronunciation is to have the stream of sounds which are ordered as follows: consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. Why? Because it actually makes it the easiest way how to pronounce a certain language. Whenever we are pronouncing consonants, we will be having certain obstructions which are actually causing the consonants to be pronounced that specific way. So if we are to pronounce m, we need mouth as an obstruction. When we're talking about vowels, we don't have any obstructions. Basically, vowels are pronounced just by a certain amount of opening and closing your mouth. So you have a free flow of air. And therefore, vowels are basically used as a preparation for the next obstruction, which is a consonant. And that's why languages mainly strive to that moment where you have a consonant, vowel, because that's the easiest way to pronounce. That's why usage of a or an is based on whether the following word starts with a consonant or with a vowel. We have to point out that it's connected to the pronunciation. Why? For the plain simple things. Not all the words in English which are written with the first letter being consonant are also pronounced with the first sound being the consonant sound. It's super awesome if it matches. For example, the word car, the first sound that you hear is k. The first letter which you see in writing is C. So it's consonant, consonant. That's a very simple situation. Therefore, it will be a car. If we have a vowel-vowel situation, for example, orange, pronounced with O, which is a vowel, written with O, which is a vowel. So it will be an orange. But what happens if we have it mixed? Around 48 to 50% of the words in English are from French. Typical for French language is so-called silent H. You can find it in the simplest word in English, which is the word hour. Starts with the consonant in writing, with the silent H, pronounced without it. Pronounced, the first one is ow, diphthong ow. So the first sound that we hear basically is a vowel. In that case, we are obliged to use, actually we are not obliged, but we should use an hour to actually make it easier for ourselves, because, I mean, you don't have to trust me. You can try and pronounce a hour and an hour, which is easier. Of course, an hour, because you've got the vowel, consonant, vowel, interference, basically the vowel, consonant, vowel stream of sounds, which is the easiest one to produce. Also, the situation where you can find words which start with a vowel in writing, for example, with the letter U, but whenever we have U as the first letter, we usually pronounce it with Y, U. For example, in the word university. So it will not be an university, it will be a university, because the pronunciation is the most important thing. So Yes, the rule is a plus consonant, n plus vowel, but in pronunciation, not in writing, because it is the difference which is used based on pronunciation. This specifics about when to use a or n doesn't just apply to the full words. It also stretches to acronyms as well. So all of those abbreviations will also fall under this rule, but be careful, not as the abbreviations for the words that they're standing, you know, how we are pronouncing the words that they actually replace, but for the pronunciation of those acronyms. For example, you have the phrase member of parliament. The first sound that we actually hear is m, member of parliament. That says it's a consonant, therefore the article, the indefinite article used will be a member of parliament. But when we abbreviate it, when we shorten it to MP, just because we are pronouncing each letter with an E as the first sound that we hear, MP, that actually requires from us to use N. So be very careful when using when actually having to use the indefinite article with the acronym forms of the words, because the form of the article that you will be using now complies to the pronunciation of the acronym, not how the full phrase is pronounced. And that is basically all that I have to point out about the indefinite article as the most generally misused and confused things. Now we can move on to the definite article and see what usually gets confused there. When we're talking about the definite article, it is mostly used to describe some specific or already determined nouns or things or items. So if you remember that boy which I mentioned, which was in my garden, I said there is a boy in my garden. In the next sentence, if we would be referring to that exact boy, it would no longer be, some boy which I randomly mention. And in that case, we would be using the article the, because that one, the boy, is already determined one. We already know which boy I'm talking about. So the boy is my neighbor's son. When we are talking about something which was already specified, which was already mentioned, we will be using the article the. When I mentioned those singular and plural nouns, of course, the article the can be used to represent plural, especially of those nouns which have irregular plural forms. For example, I had a fish for lunch, one, and I had the fish for lunch, meaning either some specific fish which was prepared for me or more fish. But of course, those are the things which are in more detailed, seen from the context itself, whether I'm referring to something which is already familiar or I'm talking about the plural. Fishes would be if it is several different kinds of fish. And if I ate, for example, 2 fish of the same kind, I could say I ate the fish, meaning that I didn't only eat one, but it was the same brand of fish. It was the same species. Yeah. It was the same species. For example, if I had cod or salmon, I ate the salmon. That would mean that I ate more than one. Or the salmon that I bought this morning, the specific one, not the one that I bought 2 years ago, but the one which I bought this morning.
So that was also kind of relevant to point out here.
And if I said, well, I already spoke about those plurals where it could be allowed to use fishes, but if I said I ate fishes, then according to that logic, that would mean that I had several different fish, but that they were several different species. For example, I ate half of a cod, I ate one trout, and I ate, or I tried or tasted a bit of salmon.
So that would be the case if I ate paella or whatever it's called. That shit.
Well, if you ate paella, you wouldn't know what you ate. Yeah, but because it's usually mixed with, or for example, fish stew in Serbia. If you ate fish stew in Serbia, the best one is prepared with several different kinds of fish. Fishes.
Let's go.
Okay. And what causes definitely a lot of confusion when we're talking about the definite article is the proper usage of the article, if usage at all, when we're talking about geographical names. Now, when we're talking about geographical names, the easiest way to somehow memorize it, that majority of those which are in plural forms will have the article the. So, for example, for the names of the countries, those names which are in plural forms, they will always have the article the. One bipolar country, as I like to call it, that's the country called Holland. If it's Holland, then no article. If it's Netherlands, then you will have to use the article the, because you have that lands in the plural form. Also, the countries which in their own, in their full name, have the word united or unison will always have the article the. For example, the United States of America, the United Kingdom, as well as their acronyms, the USA or the US, the UK. So countries which have the word united, obligatory to use the. Then the countries which have the word republic in their own, official name, they also have the article the. For example, the Dominican Republic. So obligatory usage of the. Next thing, when we're talking about lakes, only if we're talking about the group of lakes, we will use the article the. For example, the Great Lakes. Then, if we're talking about mountain ranges, the Alps, the Andes, the Rockies, meaning Rocky Mountains, the Himalayas, obligatory usage of the. Island chains, and island chains, especially if their name is in plural form, then you have, the double reason to use the. For example, the Canary Island, they are a chain, or the Aleutians, again, the chain, plus the name is in plural, or the Bahamas, name is in plural.
Or that one where all of these idiots, they go into tax havens. What is that? The Cayman Islands, I think. What is it called?
Cayman Islands, yeah. The Cayman Islands. Yeah, you've got more than one, so it's chain, and plus the name is in plural. Yeah, tax havens, that's right.
That's so great. I love that.
Yeah. The rivers, oceans, seas, obligatory usage of the. For example, the Nile, the Dead Sea, the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, so obligatory usage of the. Then, points of the earth. points of the globe, for example, the equator or the North Pole, the South Pole, obligatory usage. Then, when we're talking about some areas or regions, the Middle East, the West, the East, the Balkans, whatever, if you're talking about a certain region, obligatory usage of the. And for example, for deserts, gulfs, peninsulas, again, the obligatory usage of the. For example, the Iberian Peninsula or the Sahara Desert, one of the biggest ones and the most fierce ones on the planet. So those are some main usages of the article the, where we are obliged to use it. And yes, of course, two more situations which I would like to point out, although I mentioned them in the previous videos, but it never hurts to remind you once again. When we are using the ordinal numbers, always use the article the first, the second, the third, and so on. And when we are using superlatives of adjectives, the best, the easiest, the most intelligent, the most difficult, so on and so forth, obligatory usage of the. And for the end, I would just like to point out that there are also some situations where we omit the articles, where we basically never use either indefinite or definite article. And those are as follows. When we're talking about the names of languages or nationalities, it is pretty obvious. I speak several languages: English, French, Spanish, Italian, and Balkan languages, like Serbian, Croatian, Bosnian, and so on. So you will never be using any article in front of a language. Also, you will not be using the article in front of a nationality. For example, he is Spanish, unless we are talking about, when we are using the word for nationality to present people within that nationality. For example, the Spanish are known for their hospitality. So in that case, it would not mean just the nationality, that someone belongs to a certain nationality, but that it would refer to the Spanish people. Then, when we're talking about names of streets, never use the article. He lives in Main Street. When we're talking about the names of cities, towns, never. He was born in Miami, but he has been living in Hong Kong for the past 15 years.
Would it be on Main Street? Would it be on Main Street? He lives on Main Street.
No, he lives in Main Street. That is a very good question, which I will dive deep during the talk on the prepositions, during the video on prepositions. The difference between on street and in street, as mentioned, is something that I will go into more detail when we are to talk a bit about prepositions, because it is it brings a change in meaning when you say that someone, for example, works in a street or works on a street. So when we're talking about the streets, no prepositions, no articles. When we're talking about the names of cities, towns, again, no articles. He was born in Miami, but he's been living in Hong Kong for the past 15 years. When we're talking about the names of countries, unless if the name is in plural, has the word United or has the word Republic in the name, again, no prepositions. He's from Italy, or he comes from Italy. When we're talking about lakes or bays, unless we're talking about a range of lakes or as I said, group of lakes. For example, we went to Lake Como for our holidays, so basically no article of any kind, either indefinite or definite. Names of mountains. If you're talking about individual mountains, no article. For example, his wish was to climb Mount Everest. And Mount Everest is a part of the Himalayas. Be careful. And that's basically all which I would have to point out about the omission of the articles. As I said, more detailed information soon available on Patreon, more detailed and bonus information. You can also find me on Instagram, YouTube, here, TikTok, and Twitter and Facebook. Hope you enjoyed. See you next time.